Hello, true duelists. My name's Craig Fee, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History, a series where I talk about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that really didn't. Today's card, the card with the most appropriate title for time theft ever in the game's history, believe it or not. It's Convulsion of Nature. This card dropped into the game as a peasant rare back in Legacy of Darkness in 2004, and has had one reprint to date as I make this video in 2005's Dark Beginning, running it back for a peasant rare status for the second time. This card has never been on the ban list in either the TCG or the OCG, but notably, at one point in time, if I remember correctly, it was a bannable offense on Dueling Network. And not Dueling Book, Dueling Network, which is the point of this video that I'll get to in a moment. A continuous spell, this card effect reads, as long as this card remains face up on the field, both players must turn their respective decks upside down and proceed with the current duel. And that's it. You just grab your deck, flip it upside down, and call it a day. Now, both players will know the entirety of what they're going to be drawing for the rest of the duel, and you've only gone -1 to give your opponent perfect information. And for that simple reason, this card never really saw play in the metagame. And I do mean it. Looking it up, I can only find 2 decks that ever topped with this in the main or side. Once in 2006 in a Life Equalizer FTK deck, because this card does surprisingly have a limited amount of synergy with exactly Archfiend's Oath, another continuous spell that would let you pay 500 life points, call a card's name, and if you draw that card from the top of your deck, you get to keep it, but otherwise it just goes to the graveyard. Useless in 99% of decks? Yes. Lets you draw an extra card per turn by having Convulsion of Nature visibly on the field and, letting you look at the top card of your deck and read the name when you declare that for Oath? Correct. Hell, it's even a soft once per turn, which means by playing 3 of it, you can get 3 cards per turn. Isn't that just wacky? So the deck played 3 and 3 to lower their own life points and get the difference needed for Life Equalizer, as well as to, get cards from their deck and play those as well, get them in the grave for the entire point of the FTK. In the early days, you could also use Giant Churnade to bounce all these cards back to your hand and reuse the soft once per turn clauses going on here. You might be wondering though, well gee, that sounds inconsistent as hell, since both Convulsion and Oath are useless independently, outside of blind luck with Oath and not having nature, or as the cool kids would call it, skill by just simply knowing what's on the top of your deck and blindly getting it right. This combo is janky as shit and it's not reliable, as noted by the single top using it. Or I guess 2 tops, because it did show up again in 2010, but here it was part of the side deck strategy, doing the same thing when partnering Convulsion of Nature with Archfiend's Oath. But beyond being the worst version of the Magical Explosion FTK I've ever seen, this card's entire legacy in the TCG, provided you weren't on Dueling Network, was these 2 decks. But if you were on Dueling Network in and around 2011-ish, it's a bit of a different story. You see, Dueling Network was the predecessor to Dueling Book, and that's to say, before it got taken down permanently, there wasn't a need for Dueling Book, so Dueling Book didn't exist because we had Network. And Book really is functionally the same simulator, but there are no anime profile pics of like Yugi or Kaiba on Dueling Book, which I think is how they're allowed to continue to get away with it, or have been getting. I don't know. I am not a legal expert. But either way, it's not really important. The important thing here is that, you know how Dueling Book is notoriously, ridiculously manual? Well, Network was even more manual than Book was, or is. Network never had a little macro for, say, Pot of Duality to banish the top 3 cards of the deck. Players would just manually banish the top 3 1 card at a time to resolve their Book of Duality, their Pot of Dualities. Or a card like Spellbook Library of the Crescent that has to reveal 3 cards and then the opponent randomly picks one, while you'd just reveal the 3 and then the opponent would roll a die, and one of the cards would be 1, 2, one would be 3 and 4, one would be 5 and 6, and whatever the die landed on, that's the card you get. If you want a more modern equivalent of that card, I guess there's Machina Metal Cruncher. What, again, back in the day, there was no macro for that sort of thing. You just had to deal with the slow and tedious nature that was Dueling Network. I bring this all up to say it was clunky, it was slow, and it was manual. So now let's talk about Convulsion of Nature. There's no macro for it in Dueling Network, and there's no way to interact with the deck outside of, searching for it. You can't flip the deck in the simulator. Can't change the orientation. So if Convulsion was played, the agreed upon way to play it was banishing the entire deck face up. And there was no /banish 10 to do it multiple cards at a time. You had to individually, for every card in your deck, click banish 1, wait for it to be banished, and then do it again. And then the opponent had to do it again as well. So you had to wait for, I don't know, 70 cards minimum to be banished after this card was activated. Just one at a time, slow as shit, waiting for those animations to finish. And then after 10 minutes had passed of your lives of banishing both your decks face up, you got to then have the real joy of the duel, because this was just a troll deck played to waste people's time. Because what they would do is they'd play a card like Reload or Magical Mallet, and then, because there's no way to shuffle your banished pile, you had to put your banished deck back into the deck one card at a time, letting those animations play, hit shuffle, and then banish again. And if they do that multiple times over the course of the turn, you're just sitting there waiting for that manual ass bullshit to finish. One at a time. The goal wasn't to win, it was to waste your time, so much so that the opponent quit. The goal would be for the opponent to see this card and quit outright rather than deal with the bullshit of the longest duel to take place ever where nothing actually meaningfully happens. Now here's where it gets a little fun because I'm going off hearsay at this point. I remember people getting in trouble in judge calls for playing Convulsion of Nature back in the day, and I can remember 2 of my friends telling me that it had been banned from Dueling Network's rated ladder. But truthfully, I can find nothing confirming that outright online. Maybe my Google Foo just sucks, I can't tell you, but nothing definitively says you weren't allowed to play it. But regardless of how legal this card was or wasn't on one specific simulator, it's funny how one of the most useless and forgettable cards there is has earned its reputation outside of, you know, the Archfiend's Oath bullshit, and just such a legacy for itself. If you played on Dueling Network in this time, you can remember this bullshit. And I think if you're seeing this and you're like, oh, I kind of want to waste people's time on Dueling Book now. Sorry, but Dueling Book came prepared and there's a little macro for it. If you play Convulsion of Nature and hover over your deck on Dueling Book, you can just click flip and it'll do it so that you don't have to deal with this bullshit because it was kind of that notorious. They decided to just make it a non-issue in the modern day, which is good, but also, I don't know, bad for trolls, I guess. Overall, Convulsion of Nature is a very, very forgettable card, but it really exemplifies how stupid this game can be, because there's just that one stupid little card that was printed 20 years ago that was designed to do one goofy thing in a physical card game that now permanently fucks up simulators. Case in point, this thing isn't even in Master Duel. You cannot craft Convulsion, it's not in the game. It doesn't exist because they aren't willing to deal with the bullshit to make this all crazy bullshit flip the deck shenanigans for one specific card that no one really wants to play. It's just programming bullshit. And I kind of respect them for that, but also they're a little bit of cowards, aren't they? Just put it in the fucking game. I mean, flip the deck, Konami. In all honesty, I don't think we're going to be getting it in Master Duel because it's been 2 years now as I'm making this, and no one really cares before. I can't see them caring now. So yeah, this card does exist, and if you played in Dueling Network in like 2012-ish, give or take 2 years on either side, you probably hated this with a passion. And then Dueling Network died, and so did anything of note in regards to this janky little spell card that had surprising lasting implications far beyond what I assume anyone who designed it had in mind. They designed this card in the context of, you know, cardboard paper cards or whatever flipped upside down by a 10-year-old at a desk, and then a programmer suffered eternally for it, and that's pretty funny to think about. And so that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, Convulsion of Nature. Feel free to suggest some videos to recommend to make or what. I don't fucking know what it says anymore. Thank you for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. And remember, not only will you immediately become a true duelist, but you'll impress your smoking Italian wife, and also you'll become a true duelist again. It happens twice. Don't believe me? Just give it a shot.